Hello, thank you for tuning in. We are here talking with Dr. Shawn Dill, who is a member of the Australian Spinal Research Board, tuning in to us from California. How are you, Dr. Shawn?
I'm fantastic today. Thanks, Claire.
That's good. Now, we were just chatting about you've got a rather unique resume in that it spans a couple of countries, one of them being Costa Rica, and you became quite involved in or authored the law surrounding chiropractic in that country. So, fascinating story, and there is a punchline to this one towards the end of this interview. But first, could you tell me, how did you come to be practicing over there?
Well, actually, when I graduated Logan College in 1995, I was a mere 24 years old. I was single and just could be adventurous, if you will. Here in the United States, there was a healthcare reform going on where they were looking to nationalize, almost socialize the healthcare here. It's very similar to kind of what's going on now.
Yeah.
And I really didn't want to practice in that insurance model. And so I had a roommate who had relatives in Nicaragua. So we went to Nicaragua and I visited, and it's not quite as developed as Costa Rica. And so everybody there told me, why don't you check out Costa Rica? Went down there and absolutely loved it. And then just decided to go with one minor problem, and that is that I did not speak Spanish. I had Spanish, in high school or college, but not nearly good enough to explain something as complex as chiropractic. So my first year was actually very, very difficult. And then once I was able to learn the language, things really picked up for me.
Yeah, wow, that's a big challenge. So not only relocating and setting up practice in a foreign country that you don't speak the language in, but one that's... so you said that Nicaragua wasn't quite as developed as Costa Rica. Was Costa Rica quite regulated in terms of health practice, or was it quite undeveloped? I guess I've spoken to another doctor, Dr. Brinsley Lane. He actually he was the first chiropractor to practice in Solomon Islands. So there's no real legislation around it over there. So what was your experience like in Costa Rica?
Yeah, very much the same. So when I arrived in Costa Rica, I would say there was probably 3 or 4 chiropractors there, mostly focusing on taking care of the expatriate community, the Americans that had moved down there to retire. When I left Costa Rica about 8 years later, 9 years later, there were probably close to 30 chiropractors. And so getting there was no regulation. I mean, in a sense, without regulation, you're kind of practicing under the guise of there's no laws against this. So, I mean, I guess we can do it. I felt like it would be safer, one, for everybody if there were laws that govern chiropractic. 2, I felt like that would open the door for other people to come to serve a population. I think that a lot of people are concerned to go to a third world country where there is no regulation. I know that happens a lot, for example, in Asia, because you're risking the possibility, just based off of the interpretation of the law, of potentially being put in jail or getting in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess it brings a sense of safety when you're operating within parameters. But for someone in their mid-20s to step up to the plate and actually write that legislation around that must have been a big challenge for you. What were some of those challenges?
Well, first of all, I find myself in situations where, I have a passion for chiropractic. So, I'm never one that's really afraid to speak up. I've come to learn, even with my involvement with ASRF, I need to be careful. There's lots of regulatory agencies. There's different factions in chiropractic. Yeah. What was nice in Costa Rica is that it was a mission to serve chiropractic. And if you've ever heard me speak, that I'm very passionate about that. I get tripped up when it becomes about people, when it becomes about this group or that group. I really feel like we should try and do right by the profession. And so originally that was my calling, right? I sat down with somebody. I had a few contacts. In a small country like that, it's interesting because it's very easy to get close to the political decision makers. It's not like here in the United States, if you have a presidential candidate, you'd have to be donating millions of dollars to even get just a couple minutes of their time. A few donations, a few dinners over some scotch, and we were able to have some conversations that led me to believe that this was something that really could get done. So I sat down with a friend of mine who was a lawyer, but who also was an aide to one of the legislators, and we began to draft the law. Honestly, it was not something that was that complicated. When people hear that, oh, you were the author of the law, really what we did was to create legislation that recognized chiropractic. The legislation did not really regulate the practice. It recognized chiropractors as a profession so that they could self-regulate, right? Yeah. So the actual regulations occurred after, right? So the Costa Rica government recognizes chiropractic as a profession, and then the profession must police itself through regulations, etc. And so the challenge and the role that I played was in establishing the profession to be legally recognized by the government.
Yeah, okay. That is interesting. And I suppose I have actually heard you speak. I was at the Dynamic Growth, and that service to chiropractic is a really important thing. I think Dr. Mark Postles maybe was saying that, quoting that loving service is your first technique. So, which brings us to your role on the ASRF board. You've stepped into an interesting spot politically because it's there's a lot of activity around chiropractic in Australia. It peaks and troughs. But yeah, I guess with that Costa Rican experience kind of in the back of your head, what do you think the role of ASRF and research play in protecting our future as chiropractors in Australia and I guess in the States to a degree?
Yeah, well, let me talk a little bit about my interest in ASRF to begin with. Lately, I've been trying to make sure that our chiropractic colleagues understand something, and social media has brought this to light. But something has happened along the way in the development or the lineage, the generations of chiropractors, and I'm not sure where it became this thing where if you are a strong, philosophically oriented chiropractor, a lot of people think then that you are not interested in research or you're not successful in practice. If you are interested in a technique, then you probably are interested in research, but probably not successful in practice and probably not very philosophical. If you are very successful in practice, then you're probably not very philosophical and you're probably doing lots of therapies and wellness interventions. I don't know where it happened that chiropractors stopped being grounded in all four areas. I feel like you can be a very solid green book reading, classic chiropractic philosophy following practitioner with a very strong technique, with a root in the research and the science and understanding of the neurology, the physiology, and the research that backs all of that up, and make a very, very good living and sustain a lifestyle as a chiropractor. So, I'm very supportive of Sherman College. I serve on the board there. I'm very supportive of New Zealand Chiropractic College. They're probably, as an entity, that's where the majority of our financial support goes to, simply because I don't lend them any support from service side. I'm not on any sort of board or anything with them. I support the International Federation of Chiropractors and Organizations by serving on the board there. And I felt like, listen, I needed to also serve the science side of the profession. And so that's where my interest in ASRF arises. Now, getting a feel for the politics in Australia, it's very sad, to see what is going on. And really from an outsider's perspective, it's something that's very difficult to understand. I've never really comprehended in chiropractic one side or the other having a desire to hold the other side down. I've always just felt like, truth will prevail. And if seeing children is in some way negative or fraudulent in some way, it's not really feasible in 2017 that we're going to be able to get away with this without producing results, without, you know what I'm like, eventually word is going to get out. Word travels fast. And not only within a community, but I mean internationally.
Yeah.
So if this is a problem, I think that really, people should just sort of settle down and let the truth come to light. When I see people that are pushing an agenda, one side or the other, because listen, people could necessarily say that I have a side, and I would agree. Like my side is to protect and preserve chiropractic as a science, art, and philosophy that deals with checking for vertebral subluxation and adjusting when necessary, and nothing else. But I don't have a problem with people that want to do other things. I know that recently you interviewed my wife Lacey, and on that interview they were talking about, or you were talking about the upper cervical technique. A technique that's provided for my life, adjusting two bones, and not adjusting on every visit, operating in a cash environment, and we've done very well for ourselves. Now, if you want to adjust all the rest of the bones and give vitamins and exercises, I have no issue with that, because that really doesn't deter from my success. It doesn't detract from it. It doesn't do anything to it. I feel like, so the role of research, what it will help us to do, and regardless of the way that you practice, is it helps to validate. It helps you to give, to move the conversation out of sort of the esoteric world, out of a philosophical discussion, and begins to give some context where we can begin to infuse the science. And this is important. These are not mutually exclusive. So some of the people in the philosophy camps, they get upset about, the research side. But in reality, they need to coexist. And so
Yeah.
I think that the research, what it does is it further strengthens our position as chiropractors, regardless of how you're practicing. It allows us to have a stronger foothold on our convictions and reach more people.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, that's what we're about, is the ability to reach more people. And, research is a powerful way to support that on many fronts. So, yeah, thank you very much. That takes us right up to, I think, the 11-minute mark on the interview. So thank you so much for your service to chiropractic and for your service to the science side of it, and for taking the time to chat to us today.